All right, guys, this is gonna be a video for sure, and of course, I'm joined.
It's gonna be a
It's
video.
it's on YouTube. So we got to playtest Battle World, and we're finally allowed to talk about our experience with it, the feedback we were able to give, changes that were made, and of course, if I'm gonna talk about a subject this big, I got to be joined by the one and only Mobile Gamer. How's it going, brother? I'm sorry I woke you up at like 5 o'clock today. Huh?
Yeah, it's 6:30 now, so that's
Okay,
fine.
right on. So yeah, we got to play test Battle World. We have a lot of thoughts. We're just gonna dive right into it, starting with the initial playtest. Just so there's a little bit of context here, we did difficulty 1. Our roster was level 75, gear tier 14. We had a couple issues. Why don't you talk to me about your experience with the playtest, then we can get into some specifics.
The first five, you had to play the five to get to the boss,
Yeah.
right? It was the most mindless, boring, uninteresting gear roster check, period. It was nothing more than that. It was either autoable, or you timed out, or unplayable.
Yeah.
There was no, and all the waves were the same, right? A lot of them were they're just like 6 iron fists. Wave one, next one was the same. It was nothing. It was beyond worse than Blitz in some ways because you couldn't sim
Yeah,
it.
it lacked any sort of creativity that you would expect. Like, kind of walked in here, and I was expecting what I saw when I played very briefly the Lord of the Rings game, where in their version of this sort of game mode, the first stage, there's this goblin, he's got a bomb, you got to hit him amount of times. Every time you hit him, it adds a 10% chance he's going to drop his bomb, hurt his own allies if the bomb kills his allies. So, like, you got to hit him, weaken the others, blows up on them, and you get X amount of points. You get bonus points for it, right? That's how you contribute. This was literally go in. This is your regular team deathmatch gameplay. Kill everybody. That's all you do to get points.
Okay, so I remember being on the test server and was like, okay, this is nothing, right? I would load into the battle, go do something else, and forget that I loaded into the battle because I was so uninterested in playing it, and I would lose 2 minutes off of my clock, and then I was like, oh, it's actually loaded in, and I need to push because I was just waiting to press the auto button,
Yeah.
and then I would do something else and forget to do the auto button, and then time out, and then because it was nothing, there was nothing to do, it was nothing.
Yeah, and so timeouts were an issue, even if you were sitting there playing. And they had this Morbius mini boss who just loaded in with like a bazillion life, a bunch of safeguards, defense up, a whole bunch of things that you couldn't do anything because the team that you were allowed to go in there with was so prescribed. You just had to sit there. He wouldn't kill you. He wouldn't do any damage to you, even at the level we had him. But you just had to sit there, and it shaved 2 minutes off the clock. So it was horrible. In fact, you were saying like you have to beat the first 5 zones. I think the developers, I'm not sure because I didn't play days 3, 4, or 5. I think they had to push the envoys through the playtest to even try Null. I think that's how much we were uninterested in it. Also, there was an actual game mode going on the live server. Dark Dimension 8 had launched when we started doing this.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on that week, and I remember trying my best to get into it, and I got the feeling that they wanted it to be an idle game mode, and then it's like, okay, they want this just to be an idle game mode where you go into battle, hit auto, and then, either you get through it or you don't, because there was no meaningful gameplay. And then I was just like, well, this is not even that, and I don't have time for this, and I couldn't be bothered. It was so terrible. It was the worst. I mean, we're going to get to the dev call. Oh, there it is right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just like we were talking about, like, this is not what we expected. We got in there, I'm sure it's not what you expected. You're probably not enjoying hearing this right now. What we expected, I think, is what I just talked about when we talked about, like, Star Wars Galaxy Heroes has a version of this. Lord of the Rings had a version. We were expecting, like, for me anyway, I was expecting new environmental gameplay, like we're seeing with Hunger and Thirst, which we could talk about at the end because I think that's an interesting conversation. I wasn't expecting autoplay content, especially for difficulty 1. Level 75, I think that's actually a good thing. I think it's good that, like, that's like a month into the game for some people now, probably 2 months. So you have your entire roster, all the teams at that level. So I think that's cool that it's not like gated to only players that are here for 6 months. That's cool. But the fact that it was still autoplay at that point was a problem. We were surprised that if it is supposed to be, like you say, it felt like it's supposed to be an auto. So why is there no sim? Because it was just boring content and crazy amounts of screen time, right? Like you talked about, like you had to start the battle and you had to sit there for almost 5 minutes for every single mission in a zone to get it done, right?
Yeah, and you had to do that 6 times, right? They changed that, but it was like literally like even if you could auto it and like if you had the teams fully built out, it was mindless and punishing minimum 30 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, and daily. Yeah, daily added.
Daily.
And
daily.
no other subtractions from, say, War, Crucible, or Raids. Like, there's no concessions in the game to make space for Battle World, to my understanding.
Right.
And I thought, we're kind of hiding there, but I thought, personally, I was like, hey, this needs more thematic content. Like, my personal feedback to them was like, Knull is the boss. Why Morbius? Why don't we have mini-bosses like the symbiotes, right? Because if this is the Knull Battle World, let's get thematic with it. And I mean, to their credit, we did have a dev call. I'm going to shrink us.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a dev call, and that was an interesting call, right? Why don't you talk to me about your experience with that call?
Well, the developer on the call was very familiar with this type of game mode. My understanding is that they worked on the version in Galaxy of Heroes. They had worked on that team, and the general, like, we had feedback, and it wasn't just Envoys, it was other people too, right? There was playtesters, there were people from the player's voice. There was a lot of different people on the call. Nobody had anything different to say than what we just said right now. And I felt like the guy that's in charge of this was brought on last minute. He already knew all this stuff that we were saying, and like he had been pushing up against a wall, telling whoever, the powers above him that this is not good. And like this was like, well, finally I can take this ammunition back to them and change things around. That's the feeling I got from the call. I'm putting words into his mouth, but did you get a different feeling?
No,
that's exactly what I felt that call was like.
That's the exact vibe I got from him as well. It's like he knew everything we were saying because he was just straight faced the whole time. Yeah. It's not like he was surprised. Yeah. He already had answers to all of our questions because he must have thought about this and he knows the solutions. Yeah. He knows if I do this, like we're limited with this, that, the other. Like he had, in my opinion, the reason I'm not writing Battleworld off at all is because I feel like in his hands, there's potential there still. And we'll talk about the second playtest because we already tapped into that potential, which I guess I'll touch on right here, right? There was a big dev win. After that call, the developer there, first of all, he fixed the time mechanics, so it no longer, correct me if I'm wrong, while you're thinking about what you want to do, the time's not going down, but any animations start ticking that clock down. It's still a 5-minute clock, something like that. He straight up.
Yeah, you're not penalized for animations. It's like a chess timer, if you will. Yeah. Are you familiar with a chess timer? Like when it's your turn, the timer's going. But then when you send it to your opponent, it's not sucking time away from you. So that's a little different.
Straight up removed one mission from all the zones, right? So there was 6, including Spec Ops. Now there's 5, including Spec Ops. 5. And they added a Herald mission. So that Morbius thing, he might have just been a placeholder because he was on with the Elite mission, which at the time we didn't see Astral there. All we saw, I think, was Pegasus. I forget what the tag we had to go in there with. But they added a Herald mission, which is going to be a thematic one wave, so it's not multiple waves. Like symbiote-esque team, at least it was for Zone 1. And there's going to be apparently cool engaging mechanics to play with there. I'm not sure if that means hunger and thirst sort of levels, or if it means something else, but they added Herald missions, which I think does add a cool little bump to it. And then there's a better interface is going to be added. So what I thought was interesting on some of the missions, and I guess we should talk about this before, is they do have bonuses, if you will, to bringing in certain teams. Like if there's a city team, sometimes you could look at it and there's going to be a Superior 6 benefit for using them, whatever it might be. It would be extra crit or whatever. I forget what they all were, right? But it wasn't obvious unless you did detective work on the opening interface before you hit gameplay. It was very weird. So they're going to be adding like that Dark Dimension banner that kind of pops up and says what the deal is with that mission, at least for the first time when you get in there. Do you feel like the changes that they made before the second playtest, just in writing, do you think that that's going to, I don't want to say fix Battleworld, but I will. So do you think it's going to fix Battleworld?
No, I don't. Oh boy, and I might be the wrong person to ask about this because I was never really overly excited about the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes version of this. So like, please take that into mind. I didn't particularly care for that game mode even in that game, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so I might not be the right person to ask. But I mean, it went from being embarrassing to like, okay.
Yeah.
That's what happened. It went from like, oh, okay, it's a game mode, but it was the other version was embarrassing. And I know a lot of people saying, is Battle World going to save the game, man? If one's like planning on quitting the game, based on whether this is good or bad, probably was going to quit the game in the first place. And I don't think this is going to like incentivize anybody to feel better about the game. I just don't get that feeling at all.
Actually, you know what is a real feels bad moment, and I meant to bring this up earlier. The Spec Ops. So the Spec Ops is what you think it is, right? You send a unit out, and you're not able to use them in the nodes for that day. The characters that we were sending out felt mostly ignorable, non-impactful. Like I think Invisible Woman and Graviton were on one of the days. At the time, so we weren't able to give this feedback when we had the call. We weren't told they were going to rotate. And there's hefty gear and like some red star / I think even the last mission had diamonds gated on some of the characters that you're going to send out. So I'm interested in getting a vibe check on you. I enjoyed the Spec Ops idea because it's a way where you can just get free points and maybe you just don't hit all the nodes that day if you're not worried about competing in the leaderboard, right? But if it's going to rotate, whatever that means, and they are putting these like hefty gear requirements on certain ones, like what does that mean for us?
I mean, it's literally going to be a benefit to veteran players and an extreme. I mean, because if you're a new player, there's characters you should never upgrade. Yes. Absolutely. And we're talking like more than half of your roster you should not think about ever. It's all a waste, especially when training materials are a huge crunch for a new player. Yeah. You don't want to upgrade Invisible Woman at all. And you shouldn't. There's very little reasons to do that. So it's basically, a veteran player either is going to have those characters upgraded or not because they were useful at some time in the past. But the idea that you're going to want to upgrade these characters just for a Spec Ops seems so bizarre to me. Don't. Right? I mean,
like Pegasus, for instance, like I know that they're kind of on the line, I guess. They're the second last tech team. But like at this point, if someone were to ask me when they're starting the game, should I invest in all of Pegasus? The answer is no. So the fact that
maybe Kestrel at best, maybe Kestrel, but
Dark
maybe
Dimension 7, you might want her for the Mythic section, right? So the answer is no. But for that Spec Ops, like, are we going to be asked to have Rescue at Crimson Gear to put her in for that Spec Ops, and then we use the Astral team on the actual node? Like, the idea of that is not really tenable to me. I don't enjoy that aspect of it. And now, if it's like maybe leave Doctor Strange off and then you take Kestrel instead, like maybe that could be okay, but otherwise,
well. And then it's going to come down if the rewards are worth it, right? And if it's purple gear is going to be the primary reward to this, and you already have Odin, then what, right? Are you going to want to take your rescue to 19 just because you already have Odin? Maybe you don't care at that point. I don't know. It's just really weird to me.
I agree. There was one silver lining though, and I'm not sure how hard you went on Knull, but I played around with Knull quite a bit. Knull was strategic. It was punishing if you just went in there and you just tried to hit auto. You wouldn't get very far. You wouldn't do much damage. You wouldn't contribute much. It was very thematic. Like he comes in, I don't want to say too much because I think we're going to be allowed to share gameplay soon. He comes in very epically, and then he's summoning hordes of symbiotes, which is super, super fun. I really enjoyed the Knull fight. What did you think about that?
Well, I think here's the problem. It was like one good day for 5 bad days, and even after the changes, I think if they were able to implement 6 days of this and have it different every day, that would have been entirely different. I think we would be having a different conversation right here. Absolutely.
Yeah, honestly, like if Battle World, if they didn't have all the other missions, right? If Battle World was just like, hey, on Thursday you're fighting Knull, good luck, nerd. Everyone would be like, oh, this mode is sick. Like this is really fun. Once a week, big boss fight. But I think for them, and I think you'll agree with me, this is a new mode to monetize. So they want those other 5 days so that you'll have teams like Astral that you're going to want to build up for this and stuff like that. So I don't think I don't think we're gonna get away from all that other stuff. But hey, after we gave all that feedback, we did have a second playtest. This one, to add some context, this was difficulty 4, so one below the highest difficulty. We had our live rosters. We were using, I think it was the Astral and Pegasus teams were against the Herald, which we saw in the screenshot they put on the website there. Timing out was never an issue here. If new mechanics were added, I'm not sure, because with my account, and I heard with other people's live accounts, because my live account is giant, right? I have Crimson and everything, Diamonds on a bunch of things. I heard other people not in the situation, more like gear tier 18 on most characters, level 100. For them, it was also just autoplay. It was just sim. But you had a completely different experience. Why don't you touch on that for a second?
Oh, it crashed. It was buggy, and I couldn't get in. Yeah. So, like, it was like, so I'm fully expecting there to be problems with this. Yeah. I mean, I think, do we want to talk about this? I think, the hunger and thirst, we can save that for the end of the video, or do you want to talk about that?
It's now, on the next slide. It's on the next slide.
Yeah. Okay, go for it.
All right,
go for
it.
So
this was the second play test. I'll just talk about mine experience real quick. It felt the exact same as the first one, just with no stupid Morbius time gating me. Instead, it was the Herald team, but my Pegasus that I had maxed out for the old times when they were the raid team walked over everything. Very boring. The jump from difficulty 4 to difficulty 5, on paper, the recommendations seem like it's big. I'm not sure if it'll be big enough to matter for people who invested in those teams, though. Which leads me to the synopsis here, okay? Okay, let's start with the environmental gameplay, the hunger and thirst part. So new environmental gameplay needs to be leaned into. This whole, like, Superior 6 gets crit, or somebody starts with offense up. So that is not enough to make this game mode interesting. Hunger and thirst, it's such a cool concept. It's super unfortunate that they put such a bad taste in the community's mouth by just flubbing the release of it as hard as they did. But something like that needs to, that's what's going to bring life to something, right?
Yeah, I mean, the hunger and thirst, I mean, I know they had 3 monstrous problems with hunger and thirst, right? Like they launched it early. There was inequity. The community needs compensation. They flubbed the compensation. Anyways, that's a problem, right? Secondly, it didn't work right. At least the hunger part didn't work right on day one. It was completely borked, right? The way the brains worked and all that. And then they also forgot to put sim on day one. And so it was, they fumbled the launch. I feel like the idea of hunger and thirst, if they leaned into that and did more things like that, that would be a big win. As long as they don't continue to flub it. I have some other things to talk about and why I think there's some severe problems with Marvel Strike Force in building good PvE content. I don't know if you want to talk about that yet.
No, we could touch on it for sure, because we had a conversation before this and you had a lot of interesting takes.
Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, I'll try to say this as quickly as possible. There is no customization for our characters. I'm going to guess that your Odin is identical to mine. Maybe we have different stars. Maybe I've got a baby one, big one, but does it really matter that much? Like, there's not a lot of difference between each characters and team compositions, and there's no way of truly customizing them. ISO is a weak system. I'm going to guess that 90% of your roster has the same ISOs that I do. And changing the ISOs around, yes, it can make a small difference in the battle, but there's really no customization. If we look at Alliance War and we look at about the placement of Chavez, that really is the only modification to teams, right? And where Chavez is placed inside of Alliance War makes a big difference. This is a huge missing component of Marvel Strike Force, is character customization that we do not see in other hero collector games like Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes and Raid Shadow Legends. There is tons of ways of modifying your characters to play differently. So like if you go into a game mode like Battle World and you're unable to beat a stage, in Galaxy of Heroes and Raid Shadow Legends, you can use the same characters but change the mods and then have better success. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? It's where in this game, all you can do is change the characters. When you're in gameplay, yes, there's definitely targeting orders. There's definitely which characters control. I mean, that is the gameplay in Marvel Strike Force. But the problem with that becomes just like the thirst, right? I think the thirst is the biggest example of the problem. difficulty 5 was unplayable unless you had all 5 characters, right? You're not getting through. You may not even get to difficulty 4, right? With you don't have Oath and Man Thing, right? You're just locked out from the content. Then there were players that went into difficulty 5 that have their rosters fully upgraded, right? Where they just hit sim. And then the bandwidth of players that had a challenging time with difficulty 5 was very narrow, where that doesn't happen in other Hero Collector games. It just doesn't, because everything in this game is prescriptive. They've tried to move away from that a little bit, by adding characters like Ares. But as far as like actually making your team work and feel differently, we're going to have to lean into these sticks: Echo, Emma, Cable, Chavez in Alliance War, Ares. I mean, there are some characters that change the way your team works, but there's not a lot. Well, you know what? I feel like Alpha Flight kind of tried to do that. North Star has Revive Runt, and he's plug and play useful like that way. Guardian gives offense up to the team. That can be super helpful, right? But in Battle World, they're not even leaning into that. You have to use this team, and you have to use this team here, and you either have the gear or you don't have the gear. You either have the characters or you don't have the characters. It's either audible or unplayable.
Yeah, so
like, and then the narrow bandwidth of fun almost doesn't exist.
Yeah, so as you're talking, I'm literally thinking back to like the earlier days of Marvel Strike Force, and I immediately thought about TechWing, the TechWing team we used on DD7.
Yeah,
there was so much going on with that, and it's because it wasn't prescribed PvE content. The heavy tags are definitely hurting the game, but also at the same point you were talking about like our characters are all the same, and then I thought about Old Man Logan when we first got him, right in the arena. For people, it was an Old Man Logan slap fight that never ended. That's like the perfect example of how the characters, because they're just so identical, it leads to very bland interactions, which I think is definitely hurting what Battle World is. And then, yes, again, to your point, if you have the max team, everything's simmable. But because this game is so heavy into PvP, into War, into Crucible, and you're facing other people, you're going to bring your characters to level 100. You're going to put the highest ISO you can put on them, the highest gear tier you're going to put on them. You're going to put all the T4s that you can put on them, right? So everyone's going to have that because the the PvP stuff is over here and it's super important. And then those extreme investments you put in bleed into the PvE and make it super boring. There needs to be PvE content that is unbeatable. Instead of beating the node, you journey through the node as far as you can. You get milestone points or points for however far you get, and that needs to be enough to progress into the further parts, but not beat the node, because it's just so boring and bland at that point, right?
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing is, like, let's say there was 100 difficulty sliders. I mean, we're just take it to the extreme, right? And so this is kind of like the fundamental problem with Marvel Strike Force. Let's say there was 100 difficulty and you and I could only get to 30 and we can't beat 31. Well, in other games, you can go and tweak your roster to make it just a little bit better to get to 31. And that's where the fun is. Now, I do think that Crucible and Alliance War, there's a lot of fun knowing what team beats what team composition, switching the characters around, Sometimes you're using Red Hulk with Apocalypse. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're using 2099 with Weaver, and sometimes you're not. I mean, there's actually things to think about in those game modes, right? But in other games, you're tweaking your characters, and there's just no tweaking of characters in this game other than ISO, and that's not enough.
Nowhere enough.
Because there's usually only one or two good choices for each character, and I just think that this is a bigger problem than just Battle World. And we have meaningful PvP content, but PvE content in this game is bad outside of Dark Dimensions. Dark Dimensions are interesting because you've got these nodes. Some characters are stronger than others. You have to focus fire on certain characters or control certain characters, or the node becomes very challenging. Also, Dark Dimension is a little bit different than other game modes because it feels like Dark Dimension is designed beyond the current gear and level that we currently have. Like Right now, we're playing in Dark Dimension 8, which is purple ISO 3, level 100, gear tier 19. It feels like it was actually tuned for level cap 105, gear tier 20, right? And so we struggle through it, right? And then we have to just do a little bit. It's almost like unsimmable, unbeatable on day one. And so it's fun, right? I mean, I don't know how else to word this or think about this, but there's just no customization of characters. PvE content is you either have the characters or you don't. You either can play it or you can't. You either can beat it and it's completely boring, like simmable, or you can't do anything at all and it's unfun. And the window of actually using your brains is very small.
Yeah. And speaking of that, if they're going to keep it like that, to this third point, they need to add a sim feature to it, right? Like, I don't think they want to add a sim feature to it, because then it's just like I said, if it's the difficulty for is simmable with people doing gear tier 18, like the whole game mode just becomes a joke at that point. But if they're going to keep it this way, they need to add a sim feature after beating it a certain amount of times, whatever they want people to suffer through. Then a sim feature needs to be added for players, like the 3-star, the node sort of thing. But in reality, like what we're talking about, I think it's so important for the health of the game. And I was really hoping Battle World was going to bring something. Right. I think you're right that the creative juices need to flow more for PvE content.
Well, but even if there's creative juices, like the creative juices in this game is team composition, who you go into battle with, and kill order, right? And using what ability and how to control it. Once you figure that out, it's also a solved problem. And then what? You know what I mean? Like, you know, you make a guide on the perfect way to beat Knull with these 5 characters and it works. Then what? It's over, right? Like there's no scaling where it's unbeatable. And the only way to beat it is to slightly tweak your characters. That just doesn't happen in Marvel Strike Force. It's kill order and team composition, and that's it. There's no modifying your existing characters to do more crit damage, to have more, you know, whatever, you know, there's none of that. There's just no customization for characters at all in this game.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think one of the best things they could do to at least alleviate that a little bit, since we don't have any sort of progression path that adds unique modifiers to characters, is they need to uncuff that lead developer, right? He seemed like he had a lot of cool things that he literally was ready just to hit enter on, and it was just in the game. Like when we gave the feedback, like, hey, do something thematic, like have a symbiote boss. He's like, boom, Herald, it's here. Try it out now, right? Like they need to let him do his thing. But I agree with you. There is an overarching issue with just customization in the game compared to other hero collectors.
Yeah, and I understand why. I'm starting to understand why everything in-game is super easy. It's because they don't want to block players from doing nothing, right? You know what I mean? And so they make everything easy so everybody can get through it, because they don't have a lot of flexibility between completely boring and unplayable. That middle narrow area of actually making it fun is such a small thing, because it's only based off of power levels, right? You either have the stars, you either have the character, or you don't. And then if you do, it's boring. I think this is just a fundamental problem with the game.
Yeah, which I mean, partially could be solved if, like you said, we get an infinitely difficult slider, so that we can hit it to the point where we can't clear it, but we can get as far as we get. A new progression path comes out, we push a little bit further. A new character comes out that we're allowed to use in that section, push a little bit further. Definitely. But
and there's something to be said if something is unbeatable. Yeah. This is not designed to be beaten. Yeah. This was tuned for gear tier 30. Yeah. You know what I mean? You cannot beat this. And so, you know, and then, you know, just because I can get to difficulty 30 instead of difficulty 40 maybe doesn't feel bad. Yeah. You know, it's like, okay, I can only get to 30. Oh, a new character comes to the game. Oh, now I can get to 31. Okay, cool. You know, I don't know, maybe, and the most that we can do today is difficulty 30, but we know that there's still 10 more difficulties out there. At most we get like, I guess we get, how many difficulties do we get inside of Scourges? 15? I mean, that's the highest I've ever seen in this game, is like 15, right? And then like, this is going to have potentially 5. I think they're going to try 4 initially, but like raids typically only have a handful. Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of, it's just not built. They don't build it that way for some reason.
I think we need higher skill difficulties. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there. I'm actually still hopeful about Battle World, although my first impression was definitely not great. And I think it all comes down to they need to try some more new stuff. Unless, and let me know if you guys are completely disagree with me, because I know there is definitely a contingency of players that don't want something interesting to do if it's going to be every day. If they're going to run it every single week and they're going to have to turn their brain on every single day to get this stuff done. I know there's a lot of people that don't want to have to deal with that, which I think is probably why they started in the state it's in. But interested to know your feedback.
I don't think it's going to go well. I don't think it's going to go well.
I don't either. But we're doing another playtest soon, right? Where we're actually to do gameplay and share with you guys. And I think that's going to be coming real soon, because Battle World's got to come real soon. It's in the game right now. It has its own tab, so it's got to be launching this patch, I think. All right. Well, let's head on over to Mobile Gamers channel, guys. Are we gonna do a video on your channel?
Boy, I feel like I have nothing good to say about this, and it's just kind of like a big downer. I don't know yet. I have to make up my mind.
All right. Well, head on over to Mobile Gamers channel, regardless, for whatever video he puts out, because they're all very entertaining. Make sure you give a big shout out to his editor, Kat, who's keeping everyone laughing the whole time, too.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, there you
all
go.
right. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye. That's it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Stay happy, healthy, have fun, and I'll see you in the next one.